Trumbore, political science professor at Oakland University. Peter, thank you so much for taking the time to speak with us.
Thanks for having me.
Absolutely. So there's, of course, a lot of controversy over the way Nicolas Maduro was brought to the U.S., some calling it kidnapping, others saying he was captured or arrested. How would you describe what happened here?
Well, he was arrested, but he was arrested under the circumstances of what was frankly an unconstitutional and therefore illegal use of American force on foreign soil. And I think that's the complexity of it. Congress was in no way consulted, nor did Congress give any kind of approval for the operation. And our system requires that, right? The Constitution vests the power to send American military forces into harm's way in the hands of the Congress. And in 1973, Congress passed the War Powers Act to reaffirm that it is Congress's responsibility to decide if and when American troops go into action. And so I think that's some of the controversy, at least on our side of the board, right, were the circumstances and the rationale given for this action.
And with that being said, you said you're supposed to go through Congress to, execute something like this. Could we see a reversal here, or will we still have to wait for all of this to play out in court?
Well, Maduro is in the United States. He and his wife were in court today. They're going to be held in custody until their next hearing in March, and I have no reason to suspect that they will be released. So, it's sort of a done deal. The fact that Congress was not involved, Congress hasn't even really been briefed on the operation. Unfortunately, that's kind of water under the bridge at this point. I think the big questions that remain aren't really about the criminal case against Maduro. It's what America's intentions in Venezuela are moving forward. And to take the president at his word, I think it's primarily about seizing control of Venezuela's oil assets. And so that's unfortunately that kind of puts us in the same category as Putin's Russia and its attack on Ukraine. So it's there's a lot left to be determined in terms of how this is all going to play out.
Yeah, and we do know he has hired prominent defense lawyers to help him in all of this. Those lawyers we mentioned contesting his arrest, saying he should be immune from prosecution because he's a sovereign head of a foreign state. Do we think that will play a strong role in what we see happen here in court? Will that be upheld much in court, considering the charges?
No, I don't think so. I don't think under international law there's any carve out for foreign heads of state. Um, if we want to go back to the 1980s, something similar but very different was done with Manuel Noriega of Panama. Again, a foreign head of state who, after American military action, was arrested and brought to the United States to stand trial and to be convicted and be imprisoned. So, we've done this sort of thing before. I would say that the Panama case from the 1980s and what we did in Venezuela over the weekend are very different in a lot of circumstances. But, the precedent of us arresting a foreign head of state and charging them with criminal offenses, that's nothing necessarily novel.
Yeah, and the president has declared that the U.S. will run Venezuela while all of this is going on. What could we see that look like?
Well, we don't have any idea, and there's a couple of reasons for that. The interim president who was sworn in was Maduro's vice president, a loyal member of his inner circle, a representative of the party of Hugo Chavez that Maduro took over after Chavez's death. The Maduro's inner circle in the ruling party remains in power. There hasn't been any changeover in terms of the rest of the government and the regime. And there are no American military personnel on the ground in Venezuela, as far as we know. The United States does not have an open embassy in Venezuela. So exactly what the United States running Venezuela under these circumstances means, I don't really understand. If the idea is we're going to sit offshore and pull strings on a compliant Venezuelan puppet government, that's really going to depend upon whether the Venezuelans want to play ball. And from what they are saying, it does not sound like they are willing to just roll over and do whatever Donald Trump says.
Yeah, and you mentioned Delcy Rodriguez has been named the interim leader in Venezuela, previously working under Nicolas Maduro. You talked about that loyalty. You take that into consideration with what the president said, and you wonder if there's a possibility of any collaboration there.
Well, I mean, this is where it gets really, I think, it gets really difficult to know what the future holds. In some ways, Donald Trump said the quiet part out loud, which is that we went into Venezuela for the oil. This is the sort of thing that, Dick Cheney back in the days of the Iraq War was very studious about avoiding, this idea that we were going to go to war in Iraq for access to its oil, or that we intervened in Libya under the Obama administration for access to Libyan oil. Everybody was very careful not to say anything even remotely like that. Donald Trump just comes out and says, "Yeah, Venezuela has these oil assets that we should control because it's the Western Hemisphere and because American companies used to do business there, and so we should have all that back." Yeah, but so, what is that going to look like moving forward? There hasn't been a real rush by American oil companies to applaud this action. So I don't really know what's going to go on and what's going to happen. I think we're just going to wait and see how this idea of running Panama plays,
And we've
or
seen
running
this.
Venezuela.
Yeah, we've seen this situation already affect air travel briefly. You talked about the oil assets. Any other areas this could potentially have? I know a lot of people are wondering, could this lead to a war here?
I think it could. I mean, the president has not ruled out further military action if Venezuela doesn't play ball, whatever that ends up meaning. He has threatened Rodriguez, the now acting president, with consequences greater than what Maduro has faced if she defies him. So who knows, right? This is and Venezuela is a country of 50 million people. Its military is very well armed. There are armed groups that support the Venezuelan government. There are armed groups in the western part of the country that sort of make that ungovernable. So, Venezuela is a boiling kettle, and it's hard to know when that's going to boil over.
And I know it's still very early here, but in your expert opinion, what could we see happen if Maduro is found guilty of these charges versus if he's not found guilty? And you got to think about that retaliation as well.
Right. So, I mean, if he's found guilty, and I would not be surprised if he were, if he's found guilty, he'll end up where, Manuel Noriega is, which is in federal prison. He'll end up where the former president of Honduras was until he was pardoned by Donald Trump, which is in federal prison. The former leader of Honduras was convicted of drug trafficking and sentenced in American courts to 45 years in prison. And about 5 weeks ago, Donald Trump freed him. So, does Maduro have a future presidential pardon from Donald Trump waiting for him at some point down the road? Who knows? But I fully suspect that Maduro will eventually be convicted. And if that's the case, he'll join the ranks of federal prisoners.
Professor Peter Trumbore with Oakland University, thank you so much for joining us, and thanks for your insight as well.
You're very welcome.